Hello, everyone. This is Glenn and Tanya Coleman welcoming you to another episode of Marriage Matters. We're so glad to be back with you guys. For those of you who are joining us for the very first time, like I said earlier, my name is Glenn Coleman.
And I'm Tanya Coleman.
And this is a show about all things relationships.
Yes.
Whether it's marriage, dating, and we even talk about even just relationships in general, whether it's with your kids or maybe even families, friends. Or maybe coworkers. Maybe you can use some of this, with your coworkers or your manager or whatever. Anyway.
Relationships in general, that's what we're about.
So, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Good,
awesome.
good. You're looking good.
Thank you.
Looking
You too.
good. Thank you, that girl. So, this week, we're going to get right into it. So, this week, we're talking about, is honesty the best policy? It's a question. Is honesty the best policy?
I know what I think.
Okay. Do you want to say what you think now, or you want to kind of talk about it?
I'm going to let you talk about it some. Then
okay.
I'll let you know where I am.
All right. So, I guess some people may say that it's not a good idea to tell your spouse, everything, every thought that you're having. Some things are best kept to yourself. Maybe when your wife is, 9 months pregnant, and she says, "Do I look fat?" Is that a good time? I mean, tell me as from a woman, what do you want to hear?
You don't want to hear that you look fat. No one wants to hear that, right?
Right.
At 9 months pregnant.
Right.
So you need to be very creative with your words when you respond to that answer. To that question, rather.
But I don't know if you've ever asked me that when you were pregnant.
No, because I know. I already knew.
Well, I would probably say, you look pregnant.
There you go. That's a good response.
I would say you look pregnant.
You look pregnant. You look full.
I remember we were in the doctor's office, and the sports center was on.
Oh,
and and they had this, they was talking about this one player, and there was like, he's X amount of pounds. And I remember you looked at me and you like, I weigh the same amount as him. I weigh as much as a football player. You remember that?
I do remember that. Yes.
I hope this audio's not coming in too hot. It's kind of peaking there. But anyway, so is honesty always the best policy?
I say yes.
You say yes?
I say yes. And, you used a funny example, with a 9-month woman who's 9 months pregnant, and she asks, do I look fat? I mean, she's asking you that reason because she feels bigger than she normally does.
Yeah.
You feel huge. But, even in that, there's a way to answer that question in love.
Yeah.
So I believe that honesty is always the best policy. Now, sometimes you don't want to be blunt, honest to the point of hurting someone's feelings, but honesty is definitely the best policy. And because, one of our things is that we don't have any secrets in marriage. And because we are one, we talk about everything, and for some people, everyone is different. Sometimes it may take one spouse longer than the other person to be up, to come out and discuss certain things. But I think that it definitely should be discussed. And I don't mean like 5 years later you come out and discuss it. I mean, if it takes you a day or two to process how you want to communicate something, that's fine. But I don't think that keeping secrets necessarily is the best way to manage your relationship.
So there is never, so what you're saying is that there's never a time where you can ever be too honest with your spouse.
No, I mean, I don't believe that. There are times where maybe there's a celebration coming up, there's a holiday, maybe there's a gift. And so I'm not going to come and say, oh, Glenn, I bought you this for your birthday.
Right, but because, that's not being dishonest.
Right, that's not being dishonest. But I'm just saying, we're talking about all things. Okay, right. No, we're not talking about that. But I don't think that there's ever a time. I would not like it if you were dishonest with me about some things, or you held some things in that needed to be discussed, and you never discuss them with me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I guess what I hear you saying is that it's always best to be honest. But it's in the way.
It's in the presentation.
The how it's in the how.
It's in the how. It's in the how.
And that's, I think, where we have to. Again, we always talk about on this podcast. We always talk about doing the work, right? And I think that's where, because even in being honest, that's part of doing the work,
right?
Because I am not, and I know Tanya's not. We are not confrontational,
right?
Our personalities are not. I think in the disc. I think I'm CS, and I think you may S. Are you SC?
I think it's yeah.
Yeah, and we don't have a D.
Right.
And usually the D is the more
dominating,
up front. So we both are kind of I know I tend to, and I talk about this a lot on this show, is that I tend to process things inwardly, and I struggle with speaking my mind. I struggle with being truly honest, because I'm overly concerned about how it's going to affect the other person.
Yeah.
And I don't want to bring the other person down, or I don't want to hurt the other person, or I don't want the other person to think ill, if I could say that, towards me. So I have a problem, with, and even today I still struggle with, there's some thoughts that I can honestly say that I think, and I want to tell you, but it's like, I don't want to tell her that, and the other times I think I think this way too, is what I'm going to tell her going to benefit the marriage? You know what I'm saying? If I don't like A, B, or C, is it detrimental to the marriage? And then if it is if it's detrimental, then I need to address it. But if it's just more preference, what about that?
So, I hear you. My thoughts on that though is, okay, if it's preference, if it's not quote unquote detrimental to the marriage, if it's preference, is it a preference that you can live without? You know what I'm saying? Like, if I am saying or doing something, or there's something that's, run a certain way in the home or what have you, and it's something that doesn't sit well with you, but you don't want to bring it to the forefront. You're like, is this, if we talk about this, is this going to be beneficial to the marriage? Well, I guess my question is, can you live with how things are without resentment building up? You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
And I guess those are all things that you need to consider, right? When you're going through this process, is it something that I can, like you said, it's something I can live without, or is this going to cause me to treat you differently?
Correct. Is it going to change your viewpoint of me? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think those are questions that you have to ask yourself. If you are a person that's not very confrontational, like neither of us are very.
And when we say confrontational, we don't mean as in the negative connotation. We just mean we're both the type of people that would rather. It's like. Great example, and just don't forget what you're saying. But I remember Tanya telling me this, that she was going to this nail salon, and they were hurting her
the cuticle,
but she wouldn't say anything because she didn't want to
offend, didn't want to whatever. I don't know what I was thinking. Yeah.
So. Those are the things that those are the type of people that we are. Those are the type of personalities that we have. If somebody they could be breaking our arm, but because we don't want to offend them, we'll just,
well,
and maybe that's an extreme. That's not going to happen. That's an extreme example, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
You know
we tend to have very caring personalities, and sometimes, and we've talked about this in depth, one-on-one, being very self-sacrificial and putting others and other things before ourselves.
So keep all of that in mind when we're talking through this. So I hope you didn't forget what you were saying.
I hope I didn't forget what I was saying. I think I was saying that when you are deciding rather not to have a discussion that could for you be a hard discussion, bringing something to the table, you're deciding, is this thing worth talking about? Is it detrimental to the marriage or not? And my point was that if it is something that bothers you to the degree that it's going to it brings frustration to you, and it will continue to do that, and it's something that you can't live with, then it is something that needs to be discussed. If it is, she didn't put the flat iron up, for 3 days in a row, and it's really not that big of a deal to you, fine. If it just gets under your skin and it frustrates you, then you start finding other things that, then that's something that we need to have a discussion. So I think it has to be relevant. It's funny. This week I had a coworker tell me we were having some discussions about some things in the office, and we were joking, but she said Miss Tanya is, what did she say? She said Miss Tanya is undercover savage because which I thought was hilarious, because I am learning to communicate those things.
Sorry.
That's okay. He just want to touch me.
I do.
To communicate those things, okay.
Oh.
That bother me in a nice way. So I can say what I need to say without being hurtful or rude, but I get the point across.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And, that's one of the things that, I've really been working on in this growth journey, this growth challenge. Shout out to the kitchen table.
Awesome.
And the growth challenge. By the way, if you want to go through a life-changing experience, I highly recommend Growth Challenge. It's it's 3 parts. The first part, I think, is 3 days, 2.5 days?
You did a Friday, Saturday,
Sunday. Yeah, but it's phenomenal. But that's one of the things that came out of that growth challenge for me. Was to really practice speaking up. So, I'm trying to do that, even with the flat iron thing, because here's the deal, because the flat iron plus the shoes plus the towel plus the didn't spread the bed plus the
dishes in the sink,
then a really bad day at work could equal something really
you don't
big
ever clean up.
and explosive, right? So it's really good to practice, and it's kind of like, I guess I see it kind of like, we another thing we're doing with our kids, and I'm trying to do with the girls, is I'm trying not to blow up at the little things. In other words, something little, they tell me something, because what that does is it creates this mindset that I can't come to dad with
and
things.
Tell him anything,
so when the big things happen, they definitely not going to come if I get mad when they do the little things, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
But I think, for this, and we have, we've talked about this in depth in the podcast before, about communication. So for us, we communicate openly, honestly, often about everything all the time. That's kind of our communication policy. And for me, that's always being honest. So whether it's good or bad or what have you, we have to talk about it. And oftentimes I believe that that's where distance is built between couples, because they don't communicate. They don't talk.
Yeah.
Even if this is bothering me, I'm just going to suck it up and take it in and just push it down and push through, and I'll walk around with an attitude. I won't be open. I won't be intimate. I won't do all of these things, and then maybe he'll realize that he's doing this wrong. Well, you haven't been honest. Mm-hmm. And we're not mind readers. We have to communicate.
Yeah. I was going to say, I know a lot of, couples, one of the spouses, they can't, I'm not going to say they can't stand to be around each other, but they can't stand to be around each
right.
other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe that plays into some of that too, where it's like, I would rather be alone and by myself because, of all of the little nitpicky things that we don't like that our spouses do that just totally get on our nerves.
So every time you come around, I clam up, I get frustrated, I have to leave the room. If I'm doing something in the kitchen, stuff starts getting slammed all over the place because you just came in the house.
So you be slamming stuff in the kitchen like that that's why you be doing that?
Yeah. No, I'm joking.
No, because so here's one, and our next house will not have the open floor plan.
Why?
Because when I'm trying to watch TV and you're in the kitchen, it's so loud.
I'm not trying to be noisy. That is not on purpose.
But that's what I'm saying. That's why
you don't like that. It needs to be.
Yeah, we got to have at least. You remember the house we looked at, the one that I really liked. Mm-hmm. You know what I want. I don't want to say the address.
That house.
But yeah. They had that wall. It was a brick wall. Right. You remember? But they had openings. But at least there was some type of
barrier.
Right. So you don't be slamming the pots on purpose when I be watching SNL?
Of course I don't.
No. Okay. When you said that, I was like, oh, okay. We
no.
We divulging all the information. All
I don't
stuff.
Slam pots on purpose. It's just noisy. That's all.
All right. So. But I don't know what we saying. I don't know. But anyway, so yeah, we got to talk about all those things, and really, part of, and we've been talking about, and again, this is another area that I'm working on. I'm working on a lot, as you can see. But you know what? You should be.
Though. It's growth.
You should be, and working on not just. A lot of times when we come to marriage, when it comes to marriage, we automatically go and we try to work on the marriage, and that's good. But if you work on you and she works on her, then the marriage will grow as well.
You will bring your best selves to the marriage.
Yeah, like we always use the formula: 1 times 1 equals 1. So when you're becoming that whole person, you're creating the whole marriage. Exactly. But what I was going to was really to bring in another aspect of this is when you don't talk about it, when you're not honest with your spouse, when you just go along with it, when you just go along for the ride and you really don't want to do it, you're just doing it just because, you're not being totally vulnerable with your spouse. And in order to have a successful and a thriving marriage, you have to be vulnerable. You have to. That's what it's all about. It's about showing that person the ugliest, you know what I'm saying? The ugly side of you, and that person still loving you despite that. Right. And I know maybe some people are afraid to do that, maybe because it's fearful. They're fearful of losing that person. So it's like, I don't want to say anything because, what if if I say the wrong thing and they don't like what I say, or and true love is not going to leave you for being honest. No. No. And
true love wants you to be honest,
Yes.
Vulnerability.
If I truly love you, I want to see the true you.
I want access to all of you. Vulnerability is the key to that intimacy that everyone wants. And we talk about intimacy a lot in Marriage Matters, and we're not just talking about physical sexual intimacy, but intimacy, being seen, being heard,
and being loved. I think is what that is defined, something like that.
Being seen, being heard, being loved, not being ashamed to fully present who you are. Vulnerability is the key to that. It's like, we want this deep connection with people, And so the connection, you have to go through this door, and vulnerability is the key to that door, you know? And I think the door is communication.
Yeah.
You know, that we have to communicate well. We have to communicate effectively. And that's part of the challenge, is that when people are communicating and they're being honest, they're not communicating effectively.
Say that again.
When people are communicating with one another
And not
and they are being honest.
Okay.
They tend to sometimes not communicate effectively. So therefore, it's not really heard. And you have people that when that happens, that's when those walls begin to go up, because if I'm honest, you can't take me being honest with you. Well, maybe it's not that I can't take you being honest with me, but maybe you need to be honest and communicate what you're saying in a different way.
I see what you're saying.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So what you're saying, it's the manner in which you're communicating, you know, you're giving
Exactly.
all of those
All of
things.
that.
Don't be grabbing at me, you know.
Right. Because you don't even know.
Yeah,
No.
I got what you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, and that's true, because, you know, and I say this a lot, you know, one of the, you know, I used to tell Tanya, you know, I don't like when she talks to me in that high voice. But that's what I was saying. Basically, I was saying I don't like the way, I understand what you're communicating, but I'm saying I don't like the way. And a lot of times you don't want your communication to be hindered by the method.
Right.
By the way, by the
Right.
tone, by the body. Do you know that different people say different things, but I think it's like anywhere from 60 to 80% of communication is nonverbal. 60 to 80% of communication is nonverbal.
I have a question for you, though.
Okay.
Why is it when we would have, you know, heated communication, if we can say that?
I wouldn't even call it really
It wasn't really heated, but, you know, the moments when I would talk in the high voice. Why didn't you like that? How did it make you feel?
It made me feel like you was talking to Bethany or Bailey.
Okay.
Because that's how you would talk to
But
Bethany.
even
or Bailey.
before Bethany and Bailey, you can't reference Bethany and Bailey.
Well, then
because
it just makes me feel like I'm not a child.
there you go. You felt
Demeaned.
demeaned,
Is that
disrespected.
disrespected? Maybe that's a better word. Yeah.
So that's why we have to work on how we communicate. Because it's important when we're communicating with our spouse that we take into consideration how this is going to make them feel. And it's not that I shouldn't say it because it's going to make them feel bad. I always purpose in my heart, I never wanted to disrespect you, because I always purpose in my heart to honor you. So I don't want to say things in a way that makes you feel disrespected or dishonored.
And I think that's what, that's what, because the ultimate goal of communication is for what you are, the words that are coming. You understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? No, the words that you are putting forth are being received. Because when most people say that they communicate, what they're really saying is they are letting out their frustrations. And letting out your frustrations is not communication, because you're saying it from a place of frustration. But the goal of communication is for what I'm saying is to be received and understood by the person. So I have to take in consideration that person when I am communicating. Because if I, like if I have a child that I was talking to someone at work, and she was saying that one of her kids, she learned that, if I scream at her, she just shuts down. And it's like it didn't matter what I say, but when I talk to her calmly, she can hear, what I'm saying and comprehend. So that's really good. Yeah. And here's the other thing is, in communication, I think that, again, it goes back to motive. Are you talking at your spouse just to get your frustrations out? Or are you saying it from a place of love? Because I want this relationship to be better. I want you to be better. And so if Tanya is doing something that I don't think is, or I just, I don't think is not vibing with me. I want to tell her because, it's and this is just a really small example. And this has never happened. She probably know more than me, because she was a family and consumer science teacher in a previous life. But if we're at dinner at home and she's using, we have have the table set and she's using her entree fork to eat her salad.
Dinner fork.
Her dinner. See, I told you. Her dinner fork to eat her salad, and I say, babe, you don't want to use that fork. You want to use this, and I'm telling her that because I don't want her to be out, with
in a public setting,
right? Eating with the Obamas,
Come on now, let's eat with the Obamas. Let's eat with the Obamas. Yeah.
And you got what I'm saying. So that's what it is. It's like when you tell, or even here's another great one. There's been some times where Tanya asked me. And I had to grow into this, but she asked me, how do these pants look on me? And it's like, oh, man, I wouldn't wear that to work if I were you. And here's why I wouldn't wear that to work. Because, and I'm saying that not to bring her down, but I'm saying that because I don't want her to wear those to work, and then all the women in the office start talking about, I can't believe she wore them pants, and then, or her boss or HR calls her in and say, that's not appropriate, so on and so forth.
And so when I ask those types of questions, it's because I want that feedback. It's like, okay, these don't feel so comfortable. They feel a little off. Let me get my spouse's input. Yeah,
but sometimes, I know early on I'd be like, "Ooh, that's a loaded question."
But it's because I don't want to walk outside looking inappropriate.
I got you.
You know what I mean?
And I've learned over the years that that you want my honest opinion. So,
absolutely.
As we wrap this up, I want to just share one scripture with you guys, and this is Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 15. And this is kind of encompasses everything that we've talked about on this episode. It says, rather let our lives lovingly express truth. Lovingly express truth in all things. Speaking truly, dealing truly, and living truly. Enfolded in love. So, and then it goes on to say, let us grow up in every way into all things, into him who is the head, even Christ the Messiah, the anointed one. So what it's saying is, in order for us to grow up, to be mature people lovingly express the truth. They tell you the truth in love.
That's right.
They're not telling you the truth to hurt your feelings, to bring you down. And so here's the other side of it, is when people that I love, or people that I know love me, tell me things, I've really learned to really listen. There was a man in my life, one of my mentors, and I was on the phone with him, and I was telling him I was getting ready to do some things, and he told me, he said, you really need, he said, you need to consider A, B, and C, and before you do that. And I wound up doing it anyway because I just really felt like I needed to do it. But I actually really considered what he was saying, because I just really felt in my heart that I was supposed to do it. But my point is, I didn't take offense to what he was saying because I knew that he loved me.
He has your best interest.
Interest at heart. And a lot of times, when there's another scripture, there's the parable of the rich young ruler, when he comes to Jesus and he says, what must I do to experience salvation? Right. Jesus says, to do the commandments. He said, I've done all those. Jesus said, you lack one thing, sell everything you have, give it to the poor. And then you will have treasures in heaven, and then follow me, something like that. And then the Bible says, he walked away, but the Bible says that Jesus loved him. In that process somewhere in there it says that Jesus loved him. So my point is sometimes the people that loved us or the people that love us tell us things that we may perceive
not ready yet.
as hard or harsh or like bringing us down or trying to take us down. But at the end of the day, they're not trying to belittle us or bring us down. They're actually loving us and they're telling us the truth.
Telling us the truth. Yeah, absolutely.
So honesty is the best policy.
Yeah,
and what you need to do is you need to figure out how I'm going to say this. You know, and we always recommend several things. You know, one thing, write it down. Write that out, how you're going to say it. Another great thing you can do is pull out your voice memo on your phone and say it, talk through it, and then play it back to yourself and hear how that sounds. And you know, you got what I'm saying.
And stand in the mirror and say it and see your face so that you know what the other person is seeing when you have that conversation with them. You know what your facial expressions look like. Another thing I was going to say, honey, is not only the person who's giving the truth, but we also have to be ready to hear and receive the truth. Yeah. And so even if I don't like it, I need to do, as you said, at least consider it, you know, and realize that my spouse has my best interest at heart, and they're not going to say or do anything to harm or to hurt me. Yeah. You know?
Yep. Okay. Well, that's all good, man. I think we gave you guys some great tips and tricks.
Yes.
She doesn't like when I say that.
I'm getting used to it. I'm better, so I didn't cringe.
But so hopefully you could use some of those, you know, and
apply them.
Yeah.
Apply them. What works?
Because I'm telling you, it'll take your relationship to the next level.
To the next level.
In every area, when you're honest with your spouse, out of love, and you guys are able to talk through some things. And you know, sometimes if you tell your spouse something, there's been some times I had to tell Tanya some things, and I knew she was gonna. As a matter of fact, I'm thinking about one instance where she had to walk away, and she went to the other room to cry. But I knew that was going to be her response because it was. But she came back and we talked through it, and it caused us to grow together. And she didn't cry because of the way I said it. She just cried because it was just.
It was a recognized truth, I think, in that. So sometimes you have to kind of take that in, like, yeah, you're right. This doesn't feel good, but I know it needs to happen, kind of thing. You know. Yeah. So.
Okay. So well, that's all we got for you guys this week, and we got some other stuff coming up, so stay tuned. So this is Glenn and Tanya Coleman saying,
Your marriage matters.
We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.